So I'm delighted to have as my guest today, Mary Kay Schneider, who was my guest not too long ago for a wonderful NedTalks on deposits. And in thinking about that topic, I went back and looked at one of the articles that Mary Kay had written recently, which is available on her website and her blog, on 10 industries that bankers should think about when they're pursuing low-cost deposits. And one of them was nonprofits. So today we're going to talk about nonprofits. So welcome, Mary Kay, for a repeat performance on Ned Talks.
Well, thank you, Ned. Great to have the opportunity.
Well, I thought I'd ask because you have been involved as a banker over your long career before you got into consulting with a number of nonprofits and been involved in boards in a variety of organizations. I'm just curious from your standpoint, having managed bankers and watched how they've gotten involved in nonprofits and your own personal experience, what are some of the reasons why a commercial or business banker might want to get involved in a leadership role in a nonprofit?
I think there are both the business reasons and the personal reasons for why bankers will choose to do that. And on the business side, I would say nonprofits are prevalent. I mean, there are 1.8 million of them in the US. They represent about 5% of the economy, and that can be from the goods and services that they provide, as well as what individuals and organizations will spend in this particular sector. They also, as we've talked about, hold higher deposit balances. So all of those are great business reasons to consider it. You'll find as a banker that you may already have them in your book of business. You'll find that you have centers of influence that serve on various boards, and they're going to be asking you about how your bank might be able to provide services and functionality for the nonprofit. So it is something to be aware of and knowledgeable about so that you can respond effectively and have an understanding of the segment. And on a personal basis, it's about skill development as one area that I would point out. I mean, if you are an individual contributor as a banker, you're not managing a team, for example, you're looking to develop some of your leadership skills. Serving either as a volunteer on an organization or serving on the board can really provide you with those opportunities. I mean, if you think about what you might be able to do as a volunteer, you can help your bank as well in terms of providing ideas for volunteer events for other employees to get involved in. You can help organize something for that particular nonprofit organization that's going to be meaningful and is going to generate attention for your bank about how they're serving the needs of a community, perhaps, through the volunteer efforts. The board role could come about because your bank may already be supplying funds to a particular organization and they want someone to be, serving in an inside role there and having a better awareness of how the programs are being developed and executed and how their mission is being served so that they know how the funds are being used. So, those are a variety of things that I would point out, and certainly just the enjoyment that you would get out of, seeing the your personal efforts help deliver service to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one, particularly if you have a choice as a banker, which nonprofits to get involved in. I think if it's something that is a cause, for example, that resonates with you, go there. It's got to be something you're interested in, but it creates the opportunity for you to give back, but also to gain, as you point out, some of the roles that a person could give them leadership challenges that they might not face in some cases early in their professional careers. primarily solo producers or the like. So it's an important subject, and one that I think people who are trying to develop in their career ought to think about and get advice on. I think senior management, as you point out, sometimes has very real interests in placing people in certain organizations for different
Right.
reasons. Uh, Among them, perhaps a way to stay connected to what that organization is up to. Well, let's move away from the personal and let's talk a little bit about the practical and how uh, somebody might go about identifying what might be a good prospect. Because I think we're not talking about necessarily the smallest of the small, the bake
Right.
sale kind of
Right.
nonprofit. We're talking about an entity that has some substance. But how would you go about identifying whether somebody is a good fit for you and your organization?
I would say start with, the folks that you're surrounded by on a regular basis, your manager, your coworkers, leaders in your organization, as well as your centers of influence. Just describe what you would be looking for in terms of the size of the organization and how you would be able to solve particular um, challenges and help them with opportunities for that organization. So they may have some specific ideas for you to help when you can describe, the size that you're looking for and
Yeah.
what some of your interests are too.
Mhm.
Um, and then when you ask about that, if it's somebody that serves on the board, you have to be careful that you're not going to have them reveal too much information that might be a breach of their fiduciary responsibility to the organization. You might have to walk a line a little bit on that. I would say that you can very readily, if you get names that you're looking at, and sometimes there are lists that are published that you can find in your community. But I would say go to guidestar.org and you can get a ton of rich information about the particular nonprofit in terms of what their mission is, the number of clients they serve, how long they have been in the organization. You can download the 990 form.
Mhm.
You can see all of their income, all of their expenses, who serves on their board, who the officers are. Um, and you can also then through that see how much they have on their balance sheet, their restricted and unrestricted giving funds.
Yeah, GuideStar is really a treasure trove of information and does provide you with a window on a lot of things before you would necessarily make any sort of
Right,
outreach.
right.
And I think that the answer to the question about, what's a good fit would depend a little bit on your line of business, because you could imagine branch managers who are targeting smaller nonprofits might be looking at certain things. Uh, Business bankers and commercial bankers might be looking at slightly others based on revenue size. But I think it is good to avail yourself of the knowledge that your colleagues have, as well as the easily accessible information from something like GuideStar or one of the other sources. Um, what you've worked as a board member very closely with executive directors. What are some of the business challenges that they're facing? If you step back and say you're probably at some point going to be talking to the executive director, and that may be your starting point, what do you need to know about what's going on in their world?
Yeah, I think it really pays to understand that about the organization. Fundraising is always, number one for the executive director, for the board chair. And, they've gone through changes, pre-pandemic, post-pandemics. That's always top of mind. And if they don't have the funds, it'll really jeopardize their ability to serve their clients, their mission, the community. So that's always ever present. And then I would say finding and keeping top talent. These are organizations that really run in a very, uh, slim staffing, I would say, oftentimes, and they need to do a lot to cross train their staff, and the labor shortages have affected them quite a bit as well as the idea that certainly employees want to see greater workplace flexibility. And so that's been something that they've adapted to. The other piece for executive directors is that they are always trying to balance their future planning, what they're doing with their strategy and looking ahead 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, but also with the day-to-day operational challenges. It always falls back on them. And so, just even think about the fact that for-profit businesses are concerned about cybersecurity and the increasing types of challenges that provides the same thing with nonprofit organizations, and yet they have fewer resources to help protect against those kinds of things. So that would be something. Program development, implementing the programs, and then measuring the programs and doing it on a particular schedule. That always takes time. That's always important for them to be doing. And then just all of the basics. These are the essentials of their governance, their finances, their audit, their legal issues. All of that is, some of it follows a regular schedule, but some of it also pops up and has to be attended to. So those are areas that I would say are the challenges. And so it's good for bankers to understand that readily.
I think you're right. And these are businesses, which is important for
They
people to
are,
keep in the back of
yeah,
their mind, and
yeah.
have specific kinds of challenges as businesses. There's been a misconception that sometimes nonprofits don't have any money, and there are some that have struggled. There's no question about it. But there are a lot of nonprofits that actually are interesting because they do maintain deposits. What kinds of things would you say are important in terms of preparing for those kind of opportunities and getting focused on the deposit side of things?
Well, I think that when you're having the ability to have the conversations, it's understanding what is the stability of their
Mhm.
various funding sources, and do they have a variety of
Mhm.
those? So that's what's going to flow through into the accounts. And then do they have, much like any other regular for-profit business, they're going to have potentially seasonality. They may have the timing of when they receive certain funds versus some regular payments that they need to make. So there may be some funds that are set aside for longer periods of time, or that they know they're going to receive those funds, say, for 3 years, on some type of a regular schedule. Others that are just going to be very short term in nature. So I think understanding how the money comes in, how the money goes out, and also whether they have earned income. Are they in an area in terms of their mission that they might be selling merchandise, or they might be supplying coursework, or there might be particular events that they do where they're generating income that comes through. And what does that pose then in terms of their need for merchant processing services, treasury management services? I think those are helpful to think about. You can, before getting involved with them, as you look at GuideStar, you can see what they have in the way of restricted funds and unrestricted funds. You would be able to get a sense about whether there's an endowment, or have that conversation with the executive director about whether there's an endowment, and how that how those funds are how those funds are set aside and for what purposes, to know, because you may end up with an opportunity to make a referral to your institutional asset management area of the organization. That could be a possibility as well. If you know how many employees they have, you can be inquiring also about the various retirement planning benefits that they offer, much like any other business, and getting involved in that. Those are possible opportunities as well. But it all starts with that core checking account and just knowing how the various sources of funding will come in, what those expenses look like, how much they need to have in a short-term period of time versus how much might be a little bit longer. So you can figure out a combination of services that would be worthwhile for them and benefit the organization.
When you think about it, again, starting with the premise that you really have to understand how the money is moving through
Yeah.
the nonprofits business accounts, you'd be probably in a position to see whether it's working optimally. And based on my experience with nonprofits, sometimes the person who is overseeing that is also wearing another hat, and so it's quite possible that they haven't been able to get the devote the time and attention to coming up with a better approach, particularly if their banker hasn't been calling on them to that end.
Right, right. That's and sometimes if they are maintaining multiple bank relationships, they're getting a lot of ideas and advice on that, and they are doing regular comparisons of that funding, because it's not just, on a for-profit business, they might look at it like this is an extension of myself as the business owner, and some will put more time and energy into it than others. But when it's money that's been brought in to be able to support a mission, there's always a little bit more of a fiduciary sense of responsibility to that. And are we managing it in the best possible way? And there's an openness to having multiple banking relationships, and some to take advantage of certain capabilities of an organization, or it might be due to a convenient branch location, for example.
Mm-hmm. A lot of things to get into. One of the other things that I think is interesting about the nonprofit world is that it is somewhat collegial, and nonprofit executive directors tend to share freely, and will talk about help they're getting from any banker. Presumably, if you've done a good job for them, they will often be very people referring you to others that they deal with.
Absolutely.
It's good as a way to build some momentum. I am curious. I mean, one of the things that often comes up in conversation with bankers is about the fact that a lot of nonprofits, before they will entertain doing banking business, might be requesting a significant financial contribution. Is there a way for a banker to compete against that? Is there a way to address that as an objection?
I think you need to know what your bank's response would be, up front. So kind of, know what you have as your organization's interest in mind before you get that question. And it might be that your organization would be open to that. It might line up very nicely with an area that they want to support. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly a possibility. But and if you are on the board, you're going to end up playing a role with introducing them to the decision makers at your organization, but you need to step away from that because you can't make that particular call. But if you know that it's really not going to happen, I think you're best served with helping them figure out who else can help them, bring other ideas and suggestions, and perhaps others of your contacts to the table that you can help them with. And then, certainly being able to put forward your bank's strengths and all of those benefits that will help that organization on a day-to-day basis.
I think that's really important. And recognizing that, as you say, you should understand where your bank's interests lie when it comes to contributions, right, or whether you have a bank foundation. But fundamentally, if you can provide additional value to a nonprofit through the help you give them in managing their cash, the help you give them with their investment policy, the support you give them by providing good volunteers as potential directors, right, all those things can be a way to perhaps mitigate or address this issue that often comes up. Well, this has been fun, Mary Kay. Is there anything else you'd offer up to bankers as they think about targeting nonprofits for business deposits?
I would just sum it up by saying that there's certainly a lot of personal satisfaction to get from it, but the business value in doing so is tremendous, as we mentioned, because they tend to keep larger deposits on hand, and they are going to utilize other services. And we walked through some of those earlier today. And then, as you were mentioning, they can be a great source of referrals to other nonprofit organizations. And, people will remember what you've done. And not just the executive director, for example, but if you're serving on a board, you get a chance to know all of those other board members and, what organizations they represent and how you can do business with them. And so it can be a source of referrals for you from that standpoint too. But, as we talked about as part of this, lead with your heart and your interests, follow something and get involved in something that really charges you up, because you're going to be spending, part of your personal time and some of your personal funds to help support the organization. And you want it to all be authentic, and, you'll do more, you'll be more successful when you follow your heart like that.
Great advice. Thanks for being part of this NedTalks on deposits and the nonprofit sector.